The room was quiet. Too quiet for a wedding night. Olivia Bennett stood at the far end of the suite, spine rigid, eyes fixed on the door he'd just walked through. Diego Navarro. The man the entire city feared. The man she had just married. He took one step toward her. She flinched. He stopped. Not because he was gentle. Not because he was patient. He stopped because the look on her face wasn't nervousness. It was terror. Don't. Her voice came out barely above a breath. If you touch me tonight. She didn't finish the sentence. She held up her phone instead. One message. 3 words on the screen. We are watching. He laughed. Low and dangerous. Someone sent you a prank on our wedding night? Read the rest. He took the phone. His jaw locked. The next line. Break the rule, and your brother dies first. The laughter died somewhere in his chest. Because Diego Navarro had exactly one person in the world he would not sacrifice. And whoever sent this message already knew his name. Let's rewind. 4 weeks earlier, Diego Navarro didn't need a wife. What he needed was a signature. His empire, built on import contracts, offshore accounts, and the kind of deals that don't get filed in courtrooms, was bleeding. A rival syndicate had been quietly acquiring land that bordered his largest distribution route. The only way to block the acquisition legally was through a marriage clause buried in a decades-old territorial agreement. Marry into the Bennett line. Hold the land. Kill the deal. Simple. Olivia Bennett, on paper, was the last surviving heir of that bloodline. 27 years old. No social media presence. No known associates. An art restoration specialist working for an agency that barely anyone had heard of. On paper, she was invisible. In person, she was terrified before he even opened his mouth. She'd agreed to the marriage before he could finish the offer. That should have been his first warning. People who are desperate say yes too fast. He told himself it didn't matter. The contract was clean. 12 months. Separate rooms. No interference in each other's lives. He'd get the land rights. She'd get protection, his name, his walls, his people. One condition, she'd said, sliding the contract back across the table. Her handwriting was small. Careful. Like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. She'd written one line. He must never touch her. No matter what happens. He'd stared at that line for a long moment. Then he'd signed it, because it didn't matter to him. He wasn't interested in her. He was interested in the land. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known yet, was that Olivia Bennett hadn't added that clause to protect herself from him. She'd added it to protect him. There were people already watching her. Had been for years. People who had been waiting, patiently, methodically, for her to get close to someone worth destroying. Someone powerful. Someone with a brother they could use. And the moment Diego Navarro's name was linked to hers, the clock had started. She knew it. She'd known it the moment she picked up his initial call. But she'd said yes anyway. Because the alternative was worse. And whatever was hunting Olivia Bennett had already taken everything else from her. Diego was the only play she had left. She just prayed he was strong enough to survive it. Diego was not a man who respected limits he didn't impose himself. That was the first problem. The second day in the house, he tested it. Not with intent, at least, that's what he told himself. He simply reached across her to take a document from the table. His wrist grazed hers for less than a second. Olivia recoiled like she'd been burned. Not afraid. Not startled. Prepared. That distinction lodged in his mind and refused to leave. The next morning, he tried again. He grabbed her wrist in the hallway, firm, not aggressive, to stop her from walking past him when he had a question. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She went completely still. Eyes closed. Lips barely moving. Like she was counting. Like she was waiting for something to happen. He let go. She opened her eyes, checked her phone, exhaled once, sharp and shaking, and walked away. That night, Diego went through the house himself. He found the first camera inside the smoke detector above the entryway. The second behind the mirror frame in the main corridor. The third, the one that made his blood go cold, was inside the bedroom she was using. Someone had been in his house before the wedding. Someone had been inside these walls, placing eyes where he slept, and he hadn't known. He pulled his head of security aside before sunrise. How long? At least 3 weeks, sir. Before the marriage. Before the marriage. Which meant they weren't watching because of Olivia. They were watching because of him. He went to her room. He knocked this time. Tell me everything. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands folded in her lap, calm in the way that only people who have run out of panic can manage. I can't, she said. Not yet. Not until I know you won't run. I don't run. Every man before you said the same thing. The silence stretched between them. How many were there? He asked, finally. She looked at him with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite warning. Enough, she said, to know that the rule isn't cruelty, Diego. It was the first time she'd used his name. It's a test. He didn't answer. But somewhere in the infrastructure of Diego Navarro's considerable pride, something had begun to shift. This wasn't just blackmail. This was architecture. And someone had been building it long before he arrived. If you think this is just about a marriage contract, you're already behind. Subscribe, because what this network actually is changes everything. He didn't stop investigating. But he stopped testing the rule. That was a choice. Diego Navarro made very few choices out of deference to other people. So when he made this one, quietly, without announcement, Olivia noticed. She noticed because the absence of pressure was somehow louder than the pressure itself. Day 5. He left a covered plate outside her door at 11 p.m. No knock. No note. Just food, because he'd noticed she never came down for dinner when his associates were in the house. Day 7. She heard raised voices in the corridor outside her room. She pressed her ear to the door and caught fragments, her name, a threat from one of his men. Not against her exactly. More a suggestion that she was a liability. A weak point. Diego's response was quiet. That was what scared his men more than any volume. She's not a weak point, he said. She's the only part of this operation that's been honest with me from the start. Touch her life and I'll dismantle yours. Have I made that clear? The corridor went silent. Olivia stepped back from the door. She didn't know what to do with that. Nobody had spoken about her like that. Like she was worth something that wasn't transactional. Day 9. A threat arrived, not to Diego's business lines, but to his personal address. A photograph of his brother Mateo on a street in Seville, tagged with coordinates and a timestamp. Diego held the photograph for a long time. Then he walked to Olivia's door and knocked. They sent a location on Mateo. She looked at the photograph. Her expression didn't change, but something moved behind her eyes. I know, she said. You knew before I did. They do it to establish scale, she explained, her voice flat and clinical, like she'd learned it from someone else. They want you to feel how wide their reach is. So you start calculating what it would cost to fight back. And you realize the number is too high. And then most men start looking for the exit. He looked at her for a long moment. I don't do exits, he said. And then, for the first time in 9 days, Olivia Bennett looked at Diego Navarro without fear. Not with warmth. Not yet. But with something quiet and careful beginning to form at the edges of her composure. That night she left her door unlocked. He didn't enter. He sat in the hallway chair outside it until 4 a.m., reading through documents, and she could see the shadow of his feet under the door gap the whole time. Protection without proximity. She'd never thought those two things could coexist. She was beginning to believe they could. The message arrived on a Tuesday morning. Not to Olivia's phone this time. To Diego's. That was new. That was a line they hadn't crossed before. The message read, "We're getting bored. Make it look real, or we'll start choosing for you." Attached were 6 photographs. His brother outside a restaurant in Seville. His mother picking up groceries. 2 of his senior associates at known locations. And 2 photos that made everything else irrelevant, Olivia, taken from inside the house, at angles that could only have come from cameras he'd already removed. Which meant there were more. Cameras he hadn't found. Places inside his own empire that weren't his anymore. He went to Olivia. "They want a performance." She set down her coffee. "I know. How long before they act?" Last time, she stopped. Reorganized. In previous situations, when the subject didn't comply, escalation started within 72 hours. Small. Enough to prove capability. Not enough to draw attention. Previous situations, he repeated. "You've watched them do this before." "I've watched them do this to 3 other men," she said, and the way she said it, without apology, without drama, told him that those 3 outcomes had not been good. What do they want? Specifically. Public appearances. Photographs. Enough evidence that this is a real marriage. They need to believe the arrangement has changed. But we can't. "No," she said. "We can't touch. But we have to make it look like we could." The irony landed between them like something physical. They had to build the illusion of intimacy without crossing the boundary that would trigger the consequence. The performance of a real marriage, with the architecture of a trap underneath it. It was, in its own brutal way, brilliant. Whoever designed this knew exactly what they were doing. They'd created a system where the target had to walk the edge of the rule constantly, close enough to look real, not close enough to break it. Psychological warfare disguised as domestic pressure. Diego sat back. He'd negotiated with cartels. He'd outmaneuvered government officials. He'd built an empire on the ability to read power dynamics and move within them without flinching. But this was different. Because the one variable he couldn't calculate was what he actually felt when he looked at her. "All right," he said. "Tell me what a real couple looks like." Olivia studied him for a long, careful moment. "Honest," she said. "Then we have a problem," he said quietly. "Because I'm starting to think I don't have to pretend anymore." She didn't respond. But she didn't look away either. Most people miss what's actually happening in this chapter. If you caught the real game they're playing, say it in the comments. And subscribe. Because the next move breaks everything. The gala was Diego's idea. A charity event, the kind of thing his empire used for optics. Black tie. Security visible and invisible. 300 people who knew exactly who Diego Navarro was and what his name cost. It was also, by design, the most observed room in the city. Olivia wore burgundy. She hadn't chosen it for vanity. She'd chosen it because burgundy photographs like warmth, and warmth photographs like love, and love was the performance they needed to give. He understood immediately when he saw her. The calculation in her clothing. The armor dressed as elegance. "Ready?" he said. "I've been ready for years," she said, and he wasn't sure if she meant tonight or everything. They moved through the room together. Close. Never touching, but the architecture of their proximity was designed to look like restraint, like a couple so aware of each other that the space between them was itself a kind of electricity. It worked. He leaned toward her when she spoke. She tilted toward him when he gestured. His hand hovered at the small of her back, not landing, just existing there in the air a centimeter from contact, and every camera in the room caught it. The almost touch. More convincing than the touch itself. 2 hours in, his phone buzzed once. He didn't check it. Not yet. Not in front of anyone. They were standing near the edge of the terrace when it happened. A man Diego recognized, low-level affiliate of the rival syndicate, moved through the crowd toward Olivia with intent in his posture that wasn't social. Diego read it in the angle of the man's shoulder. The way his hand was moving toward his jacket. The way he'd positioned himself between Olivia and the nearest exit. Time slowed the way it does when the body understands something before the mind can approve the response. Diego moved. His arm went around her. Not careful. Not calculated. Instinct. He pulled her in against him, turned his body between her and the man, and his security was on the affiliate in under 4 seconds. Olivia went rigid. Not from fear this time. From the realization of what had just happened. He was holding her. His arms around her. Her back against his chest. The rule, the one line that kept everyone alive, broken in 4 seconds of pure instinct because someone had moved toward her and his body had answered before his mind could argue. He felt it too. He released her immediately. She was already reaching for her phone. The room around them hadn't noticed. To 300 witnesses, it had looked like a devoted husband protecting his wife. To one camera somewhere in the building, it had looked like a man who just sealed someone's fate. The phone buzzed. Neither of them looked at it yet. For one terrible, suspended second, they looked at each other. They didn't speak in the car. Olivia held the phone face down on her knee. Diego drove himself, no driver, no security, because whatever was coming, he didn't want witnesses. He'd broken the rule. One contact. Less than 10 seconds. Instinct, not intent. But the contract hadn't specified intention. The contract had specified touch. His hands were steady on the wheel because he'd trained them to be. But inside the controlled stillness, he was running the calculation he'd avoided for weeks. Mateo's location. His mother's grocery route. The associates who didn't know they were being tracked. The architecture of everything he could lose. They pulled up to the house. Olivia was already out of the car before it fully stopped. He followed her inside. She went straight to the room she'd identified 3 weeks ago, the one he'd cleared of surveillance equipment, re-cleared twice, and reinforced. She checked the corners. The vents. The mirror. Then she looked at her phone. Diego watched her face. He'd seen Olivia Bennett move through threats with the calm of someone who'd spent years learning not to react. He'd seen her receive photographs of his family and show nothing. He'd seen her describe past devastation like she was reading a weather report. He had not seen her go completely still like this. Olivia. She held the phone out to him. He took it. The surveillance app, the one that had been broadcasting the house feed to an unknown server, was gone. Not just offline. Deleted. Wiped. The server registration had been dissolved. Every camera identifier he'd cataloged from the original sweep showed no signal. No backup. No archive trail. He checked the hallway cameras. The exterior monitors. The intercepts his team had placed to track outgoing signals. Nothing. He walked through the house, quickly, methodically, to the room that had been used as the signal relay. The one behind the east wing pantry. The door was unlocked. The room was empty. Not abandoned. Cleared. With the careful, deliberate thoroughness of people who knew exactly what they were removing and how to leave no trace. On the floor, in the center of the room, was a single piece of paper. He picked it up. 2 words. You passed. Diego stood in that empty room for a long time. Then he walked back to Olivia. She was sitting on the floor of the hallway. Knees drawn up. Eyes closed. The first unguarded posture he'd ever seen from her. He sat down beside her. Not close. Not far. The appropriate distance of 2 people who had just survived something together. Who are they? He asked. She opened her eyes. Looked at him. That, she said, is the part you're not going to believe. What you think just happened and what actually happened are not the same thing. Subscribe now, because the truth behind this entire game is darker than anything you've imagined. She told him the truth the way people tell you things that have been locked up too long, slowly at first, then all at once. Her father had built it. Not a criminal organization. Not exactly. More like a parallel system of accountability, a network of people operating beneath the surface of every legitimate power structure, tracking the men who used power without restraint. Men with money. With armies. With the kind of impunity that comes from never having been made to answer for anything. Her father had believed in one thing above all else, that the most dangerous man alive wasn't the violent one. It was the powerful one who chose violence. So he built a machine to test them. The rule was his, Olivia said. He designed it. The contract clause, the surveillance system, the escalating pressure, all of it. A controlled environment to answer one question. Whether a man with everything to lose could choose restraint over instinct. Diego let that settle. And the men before me? 3, she said. Each one was vetted for power, reputation, and known capacity for control. Each one was placed in the same situation. Each one broke the rule. Not all for the same reason, she said. One broke it out of dominance. One broke it out of desire. One broke it because he was angry at being tested and decided to prove he couldn't be controlled by anyone. And what happened to them? She met his eyes without flinching. They were removed from positions of influence. Quietly. The network is very good at quiet. Diego was still for a moment. Your father built this. Where is he now? Something moved across her face. He died running it. 3 years ago. One of the men he was testing realized what was happening before the test was complete. The weight of that sentence was immense. So you inherited it. I inherited the obligation, she said carefully. The network doesn't answer to me. I'm the mechanism. I'm what makes the test real. Because if a man believes he's married to a woman he could want, not just a contract placeholder, but someone, and he still chooses restraint. Then it's real, Diego said. Then it's real, she confirmed. He leaned back against the wall. I broke the rule, he said. At the gala. I grabbed you. You broke it to protect me. The contract didn't distinguish. No, she said. But my father did. She reached into her jacket and handed him a document. A second clause. Written in her father's handwriting. Notarized 2 years before his death. If the breach is protective, initiated by instinct, not dominance, the rule is considered honored. Diego read it twice. He thought of everything. He knew what he was looking for, she said softly. He just never found it in time to see it himself. They sat in the empty room for another hour. Not talking. Not filling the silence with explanation. Just 2 people who had been performing versions of themselves for weeks finally standing in the same space without the performance. It was Diego who spoke first. How long have you been doing this? Since my father died. 3 years. 3 years, 4 months. The precision of that number told him everything he needed to know about what it had cost her. And in those 3 years. I haven't been anywhere for longer than 6 months, she said before he could finish. I don't keep belongings. I don't keep contact information for people from before. I changed everything when I started so the men I was testing couldn't track backward into my life. You've been living like a ghost. I've been living like a system, she corrected. Quietly. There's a difference. Ghosts haunt places they loved. I just moved through places. He looked at her, really looked at her, in a way he hadn't let himself until now. The precision of her movements. The way she always sat with her back to the wall. The controlled efficiency of how she arranged her space, like someone who knew they might have to leave it quickly. She'd been preparing to disappear since she was 24. And after this, he asked. Now that the test is done, what does the network require? Nothing, she said. The contract reaches its term. I dissolve. You go back to your empire. The network logs the result and moves on. Dissolve. It's just a word. It's not just a word. She didn't respond immediately. Outside the window, the city was beginning to lighten at the edges. That blue-gray that comes before dawn when the sky can't decide what it is yet. Were any of them real? He asked. The marriages. Did any of them become? No. Because they failed. Because they failed. He turned that over. I didn't. She was quiet. Olivia. She turned to look at him. And for the first time he could see clearly that the calm she wore like armor was not the absence of feeling. It was the management of too much of it. She had spent 3 years creating genuine proximity to men who would break. She had let herself be placed in danger, repeatedly, in service of a system that required her to trust no one while being trusted herself. And she had done it because her father asked her to, not in life, but in the document he'd left behind, in the careful handwriting of a man who'd believed that the right kind of powerful man existed somewhere. And was worth finding. Diego looked at the paper still in his hand. He wrote this for you, he said. He wrote it, she said, for whoever was standing where you're standing now. There's something buried in this chapter that changes how you understand the entire story. If you caught it, drop it in the comments. Most viewers won't piece it together until the ending. Diego called Mateo at 6 a.m. His brother answered on the second ring, groggy and irritated, and the sound of his voice, familiar, alive, unbothered, released something in Diego's chest that he hadn't realized was clenched. You're fine, Diego said. Of course I'm fine. It's 6 in the morning. Why are you? Stay in Seville. Don't change your routine. I'll explain later. A pause. Mateo knew when his brother's voice carried weight. Diego. What happened? Something I didn't expect. He ended the call. Then he sat with the silence for a while, because what came next required more honesty than Diego Navarro usually allowed himself in the presence of other people. He'd entered this marriage as a transaction. He'd signed a contract for land rights and walked away from the table thinking he understood all the variables. What he'd actually walked into was the most sophisticated integrity examination he'd ever encountered. And the thought that kept refusing to sit still was not the test itself. It was that he'd passed it without trying to. He hadn't chosen restraint strategically. He hadn't analyzed the consequences and calculated the better outcome. He'd kept his distance from Olivia because over 4 weeks of living with her, watching her manage fear with precision, watching her leave books half-read on the kitchen table and make coffee with 3 sugars and stand at the window in the early mornings like she was memorizing light, he'd come to respect her. Genuinely. Not as a variable. Not as an asset. As a person with weight and history and a grief she carried so carefully it had become structural. The restraint hadn't been discipline. It had been the only appropriate response to who she actually was. He went to find her. She was in the kitchen. Coffee. 3 sugars. Looking at the window. The network, he said. Does it require you to disappear? There's no protocol that prevents me from staying somewhere, she said carefully. That's not an answer. No, she said. There's no requirement. Then I have a proposal. She turned from the window. The original contract was for business leverage, he said. That purpose is served. So I'm not offering to extend the contract. He paused. And in the pause, something he had not planned to say became the only thing that was accurate. I'm asking what it would take for you to stay because you want to. The kitchen was very quiet. The light was full morning now, gold and unreserved. Olivia looked at him with all the careful, managed precision of a woman who had spent 3 years building walls engineered for survival. And then, slowly, with the deliberateness of someone choosing something for the first time in a very long time, she set down her coffee cup. You'd have to understand, she said quietly, that staying with me means staying inside something that doesn't fully end. The network. The obligation. The work. The risk. He looked at her. I built an empire, he said. I know what sustained risk looks like. I've never run from it. You've never run from risk that chose you, she said. This would be risk you choose. He held her gaze. Then I'm choosing it. She didn't answer him immediately. That was the thing about Olivia Bennett, she never gave you the quick response when the real one was still forming. She picked up her coffee. Walked to the window. Looked at the city below in the full morning light like she was measuring the distance between where she was and where she might be allowed to stand. Diego waited. He'd learned that about her. The waiting was not absence. It was arrival. When my father built the test, she finally said, he told me something. She didn't look at him while she spoke. He said the right man wouldn't be defined by what he didn't do. He'd be defined by why he didn't do it. And why did I not do it? Diego asked. She turned. Because you saw me, she said. Not the asset. Not the contract clause. Not the liability your men warned you about. Me. He nodded slowly. Because it was true. And because the only lie left between them was whether either of them would say what the truth actually was. The rule is gone, she said. The watchers are gone. The contract has served its purpose. I know. There's nothing holding this together anymore. I know, he said again. And I'm still standing here. She walked toward him. Not quickly. Not with the careful distance she'd maintained for 34 days. But with the measured deliberateness of a woman who had earned the right to choose her own movement. She stopped in front of him. Close. Closer than she'd ever allowed. He didn't reach for her. Because the rule had been lifted. And he still chose to let her come to him. Her hand moved to his chest, not gripping, just resting, with the careful weight of someone touching something they weren't certain they were allowed to keep. He breathed. She breathed. You asked what it would take for me to stay, she said. I remember. This, she said. This right here. You standing still and letting me be the one to move first. He looked at her. At the precision that had always been about survival beginning, for the first time, to look like something else. Something she was choosing. So what happens now, he asked. She looked up at him. Now, she said, and for the first time in 3 years, 4 months, the careful management in her voice broke open into something warm and unguarded and entirely real. There are no rules. And Diego Navarro, feared, empire built, control architected Diego Navarro, reached up and covered her hand with his. Not a declaration. Not a performance. Just a man holding on to something that had taken a long time to arrive. Outside, the city moved on. Inside, something that had been held at arm's length for 34 days finally found a place to land. But what the network had recorded. What her father's second clause actually authorized. What the next test in the sequence required. That was a story neither of them knew was already beginning. What happens next changes everything you thought this story was building toward. Subscribe now, You don't want to lose the thread when the next chapter drops. He agreed to a fake marriage. He thought he was buying land. He thought she was a mechanism in someone else's deal. He thought the rule was a threat. He was wrong about all of it. The rule was never about control. It was about character. And for 34 days, under surveillance, under pressure, under conditions engineered to expose exactly who a man was when he thought power gave him permission. Diego Navarro was exactly who a man is supposed to be. But this story isn't finished. Because the network didn't close when the test ended. Because Olivia's father left more than one document. Because whatever comes next, the world these two are about to step into together, it was designed for someone who could pass the first test. Not as an ending. As a beginning. And what comes after this is why this story never really ended. Subscribe. The next chapter is already in motion, and this time, there are no rules.